Now, speak your next wish.
Yes, he'll bring us back any second now.
Okay, my wish is for
Cobalt Guardian to die.
Hey, buddy, watch this.
Hey folks, it's time to look at some more custom cards, this time in the world of Battlegrounds, and specifically trying to adapt some dragons to Battlegrounds, which I think is a pretty tough task, but you guys came up with some fantastic designs in this video, and anything that will kill some Cobalt Guardians, or at least shift the meta a little bit, is good in my mind. So let's jump into these cards like this one from Therion. This is Mattis, a tier 6 unit as he's envisioning it, a 6/6 dragon, and the battle cry will adapt this minion for each dragon that you're holding. And that's really cool, because dragons in Hearthstone right now are all about these in-hand effects. If you have a dragon, conditionally, like some typically a battle cry will activate based on that element. And in normal Hearthstone, that makes sense because you hold cards in your hand. You often have a pretty big hand. In Battlegrounds, you rarely ever hold many cards in hand, maybe 1 or 2 max, usually 0. And that's what makes this so hard to translate into Battlegrounds for dragons, is the fact that from an economy standpoint in Battlegrounds, holding on to minions is really punishing. So you have to have some pretty crazy big payoffs to make holding things in hand worth it, or at the very least, ways to add really cheap stuff to your hand. Now, Mattis is on the payoff side, because of course, if you have like 4 or 5 dragons in hand, getting to adapt this 4 or 5 times is going to be nuts because of effects like Divine Shield, Poisonous, and Wind Fury in particular. If you get just 2 of those, Divine Shield and Poisonous, you're going to have yourself a really meaty minion at a base level. And if you add in, additional health and some stats and taunt or whatever you want, you can kind of like a build your own Nightmare Amalgam in a sense, but it comes late in the game at tier 6 and it requires you to have those resources in hand. So there's a little bit of a price to pay for this one to work. But I really like this as that kind of big centerpiece payoff tier 6 unit for dragons that makes really sense. And from a theme standpoint, Mattis is a really cool character to kind of adapt into all these different versions and abilities. So all in all, this feels like a really, really cool way to capture both the base mechanic of dragons in Hearthstone, but also just super cool character and a good fit for the game mode. So next up here, let's talk about Ulan from Faroon. This would be a tier 5 dragon. He's a 4/7, and his battle cry would gain +1/+1 for each minion you've sold this turn. And again, this is another payoff style card for having a big hand of dragons. And in this one, it's even more so. So for instance, if you had like a hand of little token dragons you'd been storing up over the course of the game, you could theoretically sell down 10 of those while buying additional stuff along the way. I don't know what the actual theoretical max amount of units you could buy and sell in a turn is, but 10 or 15 is possible if dragons support that style of play of adding a lot of cheap cycle token style stuff into your hand. You could have one card that adds 3 1/1 dragons to your hand, for instance, and Ulan would turn that into something really, really cool by becoming this big mid-game threat at tier 5. And of course, if you golden this up, you kind of get to double down on all those stats. So it's in a way kind of like in an Island Battlemaster where you're trying to make this really big dude. Now, of course, as we see Battlegrounds today, you may think like, oh my god, this is only going to get like 4/4 or 5/5 or something. This is just way worse than like Sir Finley's hero power, for instance. And yes, that's right, but I'm trying to envision that next level. I'm trying to go beyond and say like what could be possible with dragons. And a card like Ulan, I think, is really cool if that style of play works, if it's added into Battlegrounds, if that kind of economy versus resource balance is properly achieved. This would be the super reward card for that to work really nicely, coming down as like, a 14, 17 sometimes, and then just stacking and building on from there. That would be really, really cool. So speaking of all these little like token minions I'm talking about, let's take a look at a card that might support that in-hand kind of play. And this is the Happy Hatchling from the Mattress Man. It would be a tier 1 unit, by the way. So rare to see tier 1 units submitted to these kind of Battlegrounds design videos, but this is a tough thing to design, and I think Mattress Man did it really well here. This would be a 1/2 dragon, and the battle cry would add a 2/1 hostile hatchling to your hand. So first off, Nice artwork here to match the names. Thematically, the attack value is higher on the one who's mad and the other one's happy, so his attack is lower. All really good little tiny design things that I love to see. But more importantly, this is the kind of card that would help you add those dragon resources to your hand to support your other cards like Mattis and like Ulan. Now, I think a lot of people will jump at this and say, Regis, this is just like the best token minion on tier 1. You would easily buy this over a Murloc Tidehunter or an alley cat. And you're right. Like, even if you didn't care about dragons, you could buy this on tier 1 and it would be your best token purchase. Now, it wouldn't automatically win fights on that first round. It would still lose to things like your Vulgar Munculus, your Rockpool Hunter. But it would be the best token minion, but that comes with a price, because if you're looking to play into dragons, you might want to hold that hostile hatchling in hand. Maybe there's like some really good tier 2 unit, for instance, that requires you to have a dragon in hand. And if you want to reap the payoff of that tier 2 unit, you might have to hold the hostile hatchling and play for a pretty weak turn 1 style play. So there is still, ways to design around this to make it feel like there's a punishment or a price to pay for dropping that 2/1 on the board early. So I think that's exactly what you need. A flexible early game card like this that gets your dragon in hand stuff moving, but still gives you some decisions. Still a fine unit on its own as well. All in all, this is like the perfect idea of an early game dragon to me. So I think Mattress Man absolutely nailed it. So next up here, let's go in a little bit of a different direction. And there weren't too many people who submitted kind of sideways takes on what a dragon could be. Most people focused on the dragon in hand stuff, or those who did submit other ideas, maybe it didn't quite get fully realized, I thought. But this one from Sadie the Beloved takes dragons in a direction we've never seen. This is Ambassador Calicoes, a tier 4 unit. He's a 4/8. I think that stat line's a little high for a tier 4 unit, but we're gonna let that slide. But as you'll see, the class artwork here doesn't make any sense. We've never seen this before. It kind of looks a little bit like mage, but it's a very light blue. And the tag for this unit, the tribe, is Azure. Instead of being like just a dragon, it's a more specific variation of dragon. And as you can see here from the text, other friendly minions of the blue dragon flight gain +2/+2 at the beginning of your turn. So basically, Sadie the Beloved here has taken dragons and split them up into the various dragon flights. So we have, red and black and blue and all these different dragon flights that associate with, Alexstrasza, Ysera, Deathwing, Calicoes, Malagos, etc., etc. And I think Sadie's probably envisioning like, an expansion set to Battlegrounds, or maybe a totally new set of cards where it's like mostly dragons, and you have Azure dragons that do stuff, and red dragons that do a different kind of mechanic. And that's what we've seen more for other auto battler style games like the TFTs, Dota Underlords of the world. They'll often add in just like whole new kinds of tribes. Instead of expanding on just beasts or just murlocs or just mechs, you add in a whole new thing, kind of expand the horizons of the mode a little bit. Now, as far as Ambassador Calicoes and the kind of the buff here, all that looks fine to me. Again, I think the stats are a little high. Mostly, I just wanted to explore the idea of what's possible. You could go even deeper, design a ton of new cards for Battlegrounds specifically, and this is what that might look like. I think it's really cool that Sadie wasn't bound here by the ideas of what Battlegrounds is, but instead thought about what Battlegrounds could be. So next up here, we've got Alexstrasza Lifebinder from Blue Zombie Blood, a tier 6 unit, not a dragon, which is actually consistent with Wrathion we saw in the past in Hearthstone, so don't fret about that. It's an 8/8 that reads, at the end of your turn, give your dragons +1/+2 wherever they are. So this is, that kind of Iron Sensei or Lightfang Enforcer style card, where it's buffing multiple units, but it's not limited to just a few units on board, or even one unit on board like Iron Sensei. It's hitting all your dragons, and that means dragons in hand as well as dragons on board, which is really cool, because presumably you're going to want to hold on to at least a couple dragons. And I think that's nifty. Now, this may look a little strong compared to like Lightfang Enforcer, because you're hitting, arguably 6 units on board, but I do think attack is less valuable or more valuable than health. So shifting this towards a health positive bias in the buff means that I think it's not quite as good of a buff as Lightfang Enforcer currently, but also, of course, it's hitting way more stuff, so still a little bit balanced, not to mention the higher base attack stats here for Alexstrasza as well. So a lot of great considerations here for Alexstrasza. Seems to fit the dragon mold really nicely. Another big kind of, follow-up linchpin style card for that archetype. And what that means is this one hits all the right marks for me. So next up here, we've got the Gateway Drake from Beastie Hedgehog, a tier 4 dragon. It's a 3/5, and it just reads, you're holding a dragon. So this is a really cool idea. It kind of lets you cheat the dragon mechanic in a way where you're not forced to actually keep dragons in hand while still realizing dragon synergies. So basically what this card does is it kind of allows you to gain the advantages of what dragons might do without paying the price from an economy standpoint where you're having to buy a bunch of stuff and then holding it in hand without realizing the value of the purchase that you made. So normally if you keep things in hand, you're kind of paying a gold tax. With Gateway Drake, you wouldn't be paying that tax, but you might be paying a little bit of an on-board tax by running what is obviously a fairly weakly statted minion anywhere beyond the early to mid game. So you're kind of making another trade-off, which I think is cool and adds a fair bit of flexibility to what dragons could be and gives you options and gives you lines of play. You might just buy this for a turn or two to kind of cheat what you need to get done, and then sell it later and start building towards some other late game plan. Without knowing what the rest of the dragon assortment might look like, who knows how good this would be, but I like that it offers some flexibility, some opportunity, and solves a potential economy problem for dragons. So next up here, let's talk about Galakrond, the Dragon King here from Valorian. This is a tier 6 dragon. I don't think this one has a lot of like dragon synergy stuff as we see it today, but it is just an interesting minion. He'd be a 9/9. He'd be immune to poisonous, which I think is a little unnecessary for this design for the record, but whatever. And he would devour every summoned minion and gain +1/+1 for each minion devoured. Now, there are some possibilities for how exactly this works. Does that mean friendly minions that are summoned, or does that mean all minions that are summoned during a combat phase, or does it even mean during a combat phase, and does it mean only a tavern phase? That's a little bit unclear, but there are still some really neat ideas here for a card like Galakrond. I'm going to assume it means all minions, and it means in both combat and tavern phases. So I'm taking the kind of most literal reading of the text here, and we're going to discuss it based on that. Now that's cool because there are a lot of kind of token generators in Battlegrounds. We see that with Death Rattle builds with things like Baron Rivendare right now, and there's all those microbots that are floating around as well. And Galakrond would basically give you a way to answer those kinds of token builds, or even, you know, support a minion yourself and turn your microbots into bigger stats so that perhaps they trade more effectively, which I think is important to exist in Battlegrounds. Now, this might be a little bit too powerful against things like Baron Rivendare builds. You just eat everything they summoned, and you basically wipe out their entire build. Now, that said, they could perhaps counter it with their own Galakrond, which poses another question. What happens if you have two Galakronds on board? I'm assuming they both just get the buff functionally. But that creates this kind of tech card or back and forth option that doesn't currently exist very well to answer those kinds of token style boards. So is this like the perfect execution of that tech card? No, probably not. I think we could refine this card quite a bit, but nonetheless, I like the flavor of this. Galakrond eating all kinds of stuff. That's kind of Galakrond's deal. And he is devouring lots of things after all. And it's an important idea for the tech card. So yes, I'd tweak a few things here and there, but nonetheless, I like the basic idea that Galakrond captures something here. And maybe dragons aren't Battlecry related at all. Maybe they do some cool token stuff or summon stuff or Death Rattle stuff. And maybe Galakrond could be like the final piece of that puzzle. So let's talk about another guy devouring some stuff here. This is Deathwing, Devourer of All from Gorda the Great. This would be a tier 5 minion, a 4/4 dragon by default. Deathwing starts out like a little baby, and his battle grade reads destroy all other minions and gain their stats. So this is cool, right? Because Deathwing in Hearthstone right now, we know he wipes the board, and the price you pay is you discard all your cards, base Deathwing anyway. And this version, again, would wipe the board, but the price you pay is losing all of your other minions. And that's really risky, right? Because converting all those stats into one really big stat is bad, because it would still die to a little baby 1/1 Murloc with poisonous, right? You have to be kind of careful with those sorts of things. But that's kind of cool, again, with dragons, because if you're keeping a hand full of stuff, you can wipe your board and then presumably reload with all the dragons that you've been keeping in hand. So it's another way to help you leverage that dragon battle cry and hand synergy into making something really cool happen. Now, the question is, when's that going to be worth it? How often is that going to make sense? Another question is, does this affect minions in the tavern? I'm going to say no, because I think that's a little bit too powerful. Are those actually minions? I don't know, I guess technically. So probably based on the wording, it would affect your tavern purchases as well. I think that would be way too strong. So I'm going to say it's only friendly minions to keep the balance a little bit closer. And that makes Deathwing a very interesting decision. And I could see some games being won by this, and also some games absolutely falling apart because of this. And I think that's a cool thing to have in the game. All right, so now let's talk about the Ebon Broodmother, a tier 3 dragon. It's a 3/3, and it reads, at the start of your turn, add a 1/1 dragon to your hand. So this is the kind of fuel card I was talking about, where you could add a lot of dragons to your hand to help you support some of these other big payoff style cards. Now, a lot of people will immediately recognize this card. Wait a minute, Regis, that's like an infinite gold engine. And it is, you're right. Like, every turn, this basically would give you 1 bonus gold because you could sell that dragon from hand and turn that into a gold. And some people will think that's too powerful. I don't really think it is. It's just 1 gold per turn. That's not that crazy. And you're paying a really big tax of keeping a bad minion on board. Like, this is something that a lot of people would happily buy early in the game, but if you keep this on board for more than like 2 or 3 turns, you're probably going to start losing fights and paying the price in health. And that's a risky maneuver. Like, yes, Lich can do that because she knows and has kind of a finite control over that. It tends to power spike much harder from her gold versus health resource trade. This card wouldn't allow quite so much finesse. So I don't think the like infinite gold issue is really that problematic. So I do like the aspect of adding dragons to your hand. If you're super worried about it, make the dragons worth 0 gold. I don't know, we can make up the rules. They're custom cards. But I think it's okay as is, and is exactly the kind of power that a lot of these dragon things would need to really work out to build those big hands full of dragons and having that consistent way to trigger your dragon battle cry. So I think Ebon Broodmother answers a lot of questions really well and would be the kind of card necessary for the mode. And then finally here I have a card that I, for the record, do not think should exist in Battlegrounds. I would never print or put this card in the game, but it's something a lot of people ask for, so I want to pay heed and respect to the idea of adding healing to Battlegrounds. This one from Therion's a tier 4 dragon. It's a 5/5, and the battle cry restores 1 health, and it would upgrade each turn, which again is elegant for holding a card in hand. If you're looking to keep things in your hand, if they get better over time, that's really cool. So I respect the design of this. I think it fits very, very well thematically. I just think healing would make Battlegrounds way too long to play. Everybody would buy this card and hold on to it for that last moment. They'd buy themselves an extra round. The one guy who doesn't get this gets kind of ripped off. The game mode takes 10 minutes longer to play. I just don't think that's good for Battlegrounds. I don't really ever want to see any kind of substantial healing in the game mode. I don't even really like Ice Block existing. But nonetheless, it's a very elegant design, and it's something a lot of people do want. So I wanted to, offer it up, see what you guys think about Red Flight Protector. It's a cool card design, just not one that I particularly love. And folks, that wraps it up here for our custom dragons in Battlegrounds. I'm excited to see what actually happens with our Battlegrounds dragons whenever those are eventually finally revealed and hopefully actually do happen. That said, I'm sure you're curious about next time around. I want you to design for me a beast themed card. It can be a beast itself, a synergy card for beasts, but I want to see where you can take beasts in a different direction, do something cool, maybe support what they're doing now, but in a really neat way. Just get something creative down for beast synergies. We're going from dragons to beasts this time. There are details, of course, in the description below to help you submit those cards and give you more details. And that said, of course, share your thoughts on all these nifty cards, whether you love them, you hate them. I want to hear your take in the comments below. But until then, thanks much for watching, and until next time, game on.
Step aside.